If I dropped you into two neighborhoods in Center County and told you they were only about 30 minutes apart, you'd probably expect the housing markets to look pretty similar, but they don't. In one district, buyers are fighting over almost every good listing. In another, buyers actually have room to breathe. Same county, same quarter, completely different game. And that's exactly why looking at national headlines or even county averages can actually cost you money. Today, I'm going to show you what actually happened during the second quarter here in Center County. And more importantly, what it means depending on where you actually live. There are dozens of statistics that I could show you today, but honestly, if you only understood one, it should be months' supply of inventory. Think of it like this. Imagine every grocery store throughout Center County suddenly stopped getting deliveries. How long would it take before the shelves were empty? That's essentially what months' supply measures. The lower the number, the more leverage sellers have because there simply aren't enough homes available. The higher the number, the more leverage buyers have because they have more choices. Everything else we're going to talk about today starts making a lot more sense once you understand that one number of inventory supply. Let's start with State College. This continues to be the fastest moving market in Center County. Inventory finished the quarter at just 1.2 months. Homes sold for nearly 99% of their asking price, and the median sales price climbed to just over $460,000, while the average sales price exceeded $500,000. That gap between the median and the average tells us something important. The upper end of the market continues to have an outsized influence on overall pricing. So if you're buying here, hesitation can be expensive. If you're selling, properly pricing your property is still being rewarded. Now, if you've lived around Center County for a while, there was another story unfolding this winter that had a lot of local real estate professionals paying close attention. When Penn State hired Matt Campbell as its new football coach, I remember wondering, I wonder when we'll see that show up in the luxury housing market. Over the next several months, that's exactly the pattern I wanted to watch. Between January and April, 10 homes priced over $700,000 sold with 0 days on market. Together, they represented nearly $17 million in luxury sales. Even more interesting, they weren't spread across the district. They clustered in neighborhoods like Stearns Crossing, College Heights, Winfield Heights. Now, I want to be careful here. The MLS doesn't tell us who purchased those homes, but what the timeline reminds us is that Center County isn't a typical housing market. Major institutional events, whether it's Penn State, Mount Nittany Health, or another large employer, can influence demand in very specific price ranges surprisingly quickly. That's one of the reasons I spend much more time watching Center County than I do watching national headlines. Before we move on, I want to ask you a quick favor. If you enjoy this kind of hyper-local market analysis and it's helping you make better real estate decisions, do me a favor, hit the like button and please subscribe. It really helps more Center County homeowners find these videos, and honestly, it lets me know this is the kind of content you'd like me to keep creating. All right, let's head over to Bellefonte because this market tells a completely different story. Bellefonte continues to impress me. Years ago, buyers looked at Bellefonte after they couldn't find something in State College. I don't think that's the case anymore. Bellefonte has become its own destination. People are choosing Bellefonte because they want Bellefonte. Inventory remained incredibly tight at just 1.5 months. Homes sold for over 99% of asking price. And prices increased more than 9% compared to the same quarter last year. What's fascinating is how Bellefonte has managed that growth. Unlike Penns Valley, where much of the new construction is concentrated in one area, Bellefonte has new construction occurring across multiple developments. Harvest Meadows, Shady Lane Estates, Nittany Glen, Logan Green, Steeplechase. Nearly 1 out of every 4 homes that closed this quarter was new construction. That's remarkable. Instead of one subdivision dramatically influencing prices, Bellefonte is adding inventory from several directions at once. I actually think that's one of the reasons the market has remained so healthy despite all of that growth. Now here's where I think the story gets really interesting. When people talk about Penns Valley and Bald Eagle, they often lump them together because they're both smaller school districts. I don't think that's the right way to look at them. Instead, I think they represent two different responses to rising housing costs in Centre County. As State College has become more expensive, buyers naturally begin expanding their search. For some, that search leads to Bellefonte, not because they have to, but because they genuinely want to live there. Bellefonte has become its own destination in its own rights. For other buyers, especially those looking for more land, lower prices, and simply trying to stretch their housing budget, their search continues into Penns Valley and Bald Eagle. Affordability may be what introduces buyers to those markets, but once they're there, many discover they genuinely like the lifestyle, the space, and the pace of those communities. That's an important distinction. Penns Valley is one of the most interesting markets in Centre County right now. On paper, prices appear to have increased more than 40% year over year. That's a headline that I'd be very careful with. The reason is simple. A significant amount of new construction closed on Heirloom Drive in this quarter. Those homes are well above Penns Valley's historical price point, and because Penns Valley is a relatively small market, a handful of higher priced closings can move that median dramatically. That doesn't mean values haven't increased. They absolutely have, but not by 40% across the entire valley. The bigger story, in my opinion, is where those homes are being built. Most of Penns Valley's new construction is happening on the western end of the valley, around Center Hall. That's the part of the valley that's the closest to State College. There's no mountain crossing to get from Center Hall to State College. The commute is straightforward. It's increasingly connected to the State College employment market. When I look at Penns Valley today, I don't see one housing market. I see a western end that's increasingly being pulled into State College's orbit, while the eastern end, it still behaves much more like the traditional Penns Valley many of us have always known. Now, let's talk Bald Eagle. This might actually be the biggest surprise in the entire report. On paper, prices increased almost 29% compared to the same quarter last year. Unlike Penns Valley, this wasn't driven by a cluster of new construction. There were essentially no new construction closings influencing these numbers. That's what makes this growth so interesting. Now, Bald Eagle and Penns Valley do share some similarities. They're both relatively small markets. They're both attractive to buyers looking for affordability compared to State College. And because transaction volume is smaller, month-to-month numbers can bounce around more than they do in larger markets. But I think the similarities stop there. Penns Valley is increasingly influenced by its connection to State College. Bald Eagle still feels much more independent geographically. It's separated by the mountain. The pace is different. The housing stock is different. The buyer profile is often different. That's why I think these two districts are going to continue telling different stories over the next several years. When you zoom back out, Centre County finished the quarter with just 1.6 months of inventory. The median sales price climbed to above $410,000. Homes sold for almost 99% of asking price. On paper, it looks like one healthy market. But that's not really what's happening. What we're actually seeing are 4 very different housing markets, each responding to different local forces. State College continues to be driven by institutional demand and extremely limited inventory. Bellefonte has matured into one of Centre County's strongest destination markets while absorbing an incredible amount of new construction. Penns Valley is increasingly being influenced by its proximity to State College, particularly on the western end of the district. And Bald Eagle continues to chart its own course, quietly posting one of the strongest appreciation rates in the county without relying on new construction. Let's talk about what this means for you. If you own a home in State College, you're still sitting in one of the strongest seller markets in central Pennsylvania. If you're considering Bellefonte, understand that you're buying into a community that's growing by design, not by accident. If you're looking at Penns Valley, pay attention to where in the valley you're buying, because I think the West End and the East End are becoming two different conversations. And if you're watching Bald Eagle, don't overlook it simply because it's quieter. Sometimes the quietest markets produce the biggest surprises. The biggest mistake I see people make is assuming Center County is one housing market. It isn't. It's four very different markets connected by one county line. And understanding those differences is what leads to better real estate decisions. Thanks for spending a few minutes with me today. I'll be back next quarter with another look at how these stories continue to evolve here in Center County. I'm Jared Ernico with eXp Realty. Realty, relationships, reassurance.